The bullet cracked the glass before dawn, missing a 10-year-old girl by inches. Hours earlier, her father, Sheriff Ethan Cole of the Blue Ridge Mountains, had uncovered a frozen helicopter wreck sealed beneath the snow, its cargo not rescue supplies, but stolen military drugs. What began as duty became a race against his own department, against men who wore the same badge. In a world where silence keeps towns alive, Ethan chose to break it. Stay till the end of this story, like, share, and subscribe, because the truth buried under the snow is about to rise. The mountains kept their own silence that night, and Sheriff Ethan Cole had learned to read its moods. His SUV hummed along the snow-packed ridge road wipers, brushing rhythmically as the wind combed the frozen forest. Beside him, 10-year-old Lila sat wrapped in her red scarf, eyes wide at the scattered lights of town far below. In the back, Ranger, their German shepherd, watched the world through the cracked window, nose quivering at every drift of air. "Almost home," Ethan said softly, but his gaze stayed on the stretch of frozen Lake Crow ahead, a white sheet under the dim moon. The storm was close. He could taste iron in the wind. Lila smiled faintly. "You always know when it's coming," she said. "You feel it in your teeth," he answered. She grinned, showing a gap from a missing tooth. For a moment, the world was only that father and daughter, snow and laughter. But then Ranger gave a low growl, not of fear but focus, and Ethan's head turned sharply toward the lake. He slowed, headlights sweeping over the ice. The beam caught something faint and unnatural, a dull glint in the snowbank near the bend. "Stay in the truck," he said. Lila pressed her hands to the glass as he stepped out. The cold bit through his gloves and his boots crunched in the fresh crust. The beam of his flashlight moved across the drift, catching a curved surface half buried in frost. It wasn't rock. It was metal, the pale color of bone under ice. He brushed snow aside, exposing rivets, a faded stripe of paint, and a tail number that stopped his breath. And 9 and 8. He knew that number. 10 years earlier, that same number had filled his reports, his nightmares, and the silence that followed when the investigation was shut down. The missing rescue plane. He stared at it now, the same ghost waiting in the dark. Ranger padded close, pressing against his leg, warm and steady. Ethan touched the cold metal, feeling its story pulsing like a vein beneath the ice. "What is it?" Lila called from the truck. "Just something old," he replied, voice steady though his stomach had turned. He circled the drift. The wingtip rose in a frozen arc before disappearing under the crust, and farther down the slope, he could just make out the faint bulge of the fuselage trapped in the ice field. It had been here all along, hidden beneath snow and years. The wind shifted, carrying the faint groan of the frozen lake, a sound like the mountain breathing. He remembered the faces from that winter, the pilots, the rescue team, the orders to stop searching. He had signed the final report himself, unrecoverable due to conditions. He felt the weight of it now, heavier than the storm pressing over the ridge. Lila opened her door, snow swirling around her small boots. "Dad?" she asked. "It's okay," he said quickly, waving her back, but her eyes were fixed on the strange curve jutting from the snow. "It looks like a bird trying to fly." Her voice was hushed, awed. Ethan managed a thin smile. "Maybe it is," he said. He wanted to take her home, close the door, and forget the number glowing in his mind, but some things refused to stay buried. He crouched again, brushing more snow away until his glove struck something else, fabric hardened with ice. It was a torn piece of uniform sleeve caught under the wing's edge. The insignia was faded but familiar. A federal badge. He closed his hand over it before Lila could see. The storm wind rose, whistling across the lake's surface like a warning. He straightened and scanned the ridge. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a light flicker among the trees on the opposite shore. Then it vanished. Maybe moonlight, maybe not. He felt eyes on him the way hunters sense the unseen. Ranger barked once sharp and low. In the truck, Ethan said again, this time not softly. They climbed inside and he started the engine. The headlights caught the wingtip one last time before snow swept across it, erasing the shine. He didn't call it in. Not yet. Instead, he noted the coordinates in his worn notebook and drove back toward town, the tires hissing over ice. Lila leaned her head on his arm, half asleep. "You'll tell them tomorrow," she murmured. "Tomorrow," he said, though he wasn't sure he would. As the first flakes thickened, he glanced in the mirror. Behind them, the ridge disappeared into white, and for the first time in years, he felt the past moving like something under frozen water struggling to rise. By morning, the storm had folded itself across the valley, heavy and quiet, the kind of snow that erased tire tracks and memory in the same breath. Sheriff Ethan Cole poured black coffee into a tin mug, watching the flakes drift against the station window. Lila was still asleep in the small cot behind his office, Ranger curled at her feet. The old radiator hummed. On the desk lay his notebook open to the coordinates he'd written in haste the night before. The number sat there like a wound he'd reopened himself. He called dispatch at sunrise, his voice steady as procedure. "This is Cole reporting probable aircraft debris north ridge of Lake Crow, requesting authorization for a recovery team." The line crackled before a clipped reply came back, too quick, too formal. "Acknowledged, Sheriff. Stand by for directive." He waited, sipping coffee that tasted of metal and patience. When the reply came an hour later, it wasn't what he expected. A digital memo appeared in his inbox, stamped from the State Emergency Office, "Do not approach or disturb site. Potential chemical contamination. Federal jurisdiction assumed. Secure perimeter and await clearance." Ethan read it twice. Chemical contamination. That was new and wrong. The wreck was decades old. There shouldn't be anything left but rust and silence. He leaned back, eyes narrowing at the official seal. Something about the wording felt manufactured, like a lock built to keep the wrong door closed. He printed the message and pinned it to the corkboard beside the faded newspaper clipping of the same plane's disappearance 10 years earlier. Outside, the plow passed by, growling under the snow. He glanced toward Lila's cot. She stirred hair, a tangle of gold against the blanket. "You found something last night?" she said sleepily. He hesitated. "Just a memory that didn't stay buried." She nodded as if that made sense. Ranger stood, ears sharp, tail low, watching the door as if expecting a visitor. Ethan rubbed the dog's head, then turned back to his computer. He tried pulling up archived case files on the crash, but the system flagged each request, access denied. The cursor blinked like a small warning light. He shut the screen and sat still, listening to the ticking of the clock. Around noon, he took Lila home through the thickening snow. The ridge road was empty, the kind of whiteout that made even sound feel distant. At the house, he made soup, tried to let the day settle. Lila drew pictures at the kitchen table, Ranger's head resting beside her chair. When she asked if the plane's people ever came back, he only said, "Some things stay missing longer than they should." He thought that would end it, but the mountain wasn't done. After sunset, when the sky turned violet and the snow eased, the sound of knocking came 3 measured raps at the station door. Ranger barked once, deep and cautious. Ethan stepped from the kitchen, hand resting on the holster by habit. The knocking came again, slower now, deliberate. Through the frosted window, he saw a man standing on the porch, bundled in an old rescue parka hood, up face shadowed. "Station's closed tonight," Ethan called, opening the door a crack. The man's voice was muffled older. "Got something belongs to you, Sheriff." He lifted a small canvas pouch, frayed and wet. Before Ethan could respond, the man placed it on the step and turned into the storm, walking with the sure pace of someone who knew these hills. "Hey," Ethan called, stepping out, but the wind rose, swallowing the figure whole. Only the tracks remained, filling fast with snow. He brought the pouch inside, set it on the desk. The tag stitched to the canvas bore a number N9 to 817C, the same as the wing frozen in the lake. His pulse tightened. He undid the leather tie and tipped the contents onto the desk. Inside was a photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve edges brittle with time. The image showed two men standing beside a small rescue plane on a clear summer day, Ethan himself younger by a decade, smiling with a hand on the shoulder of another man. Captain Wade Marin, the mission pilot, the one who'd vanished with the aircraft. Ethan stared at his own younger face, the easy confidence he barely remembered. He had no memory of anyone taking that photo, and yet here it was, delivered by a ghost in the snow. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in blue ink, were 3 words. He didn't crash. The letters were uneven, pressed hard into the paper. Ranger whined softly. Lila had come to the doorway holding her drawing pad. "Who was that, Dad?" she asked. Ethan slid the photo under a file. "Just someone lost," he said. But his voice was distant, and the room seemed smaller now, the walls lined with years he thought he'd left behind. The clock ticked louder. He walked to the window. Outside, the storm had thinned to a quiet snowfall. No footprints remained on the porch. The mountains loomed dark against the sky, and somewhere out there, under all that white, the rest of the plane waited. Ethan's hand tightened around the curtain edge. "We're not supposed to go back up there," he murmured. Lila tilted her head. "Then why do you sound like you will?" He didn't answer. He reached for his coat and hung it by the door, ready but not yet worn. Behind him, the canvas pouch lay open, the photograph half exposed under the lamplight, the words on the back glowing faintly. He didn't crash. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a white silence that felt almost holy. Sheriff Ethan Cole stood by the window of his small mountain house, watching the pale sun cut thin lines across the drifts. The canvas pouch still lay on his desk, the photograph sealed inside. He didn't crash. Those 3 words hadn't let him sleep. When Lila woke, he was already dressed in his patrol coat, Ranger pacing near the door. "We're going back," she asked quietly, her voice half hope, half fear. Ethan hesitated only a moment. "We're just checking the perimeter," he said, though he knew it was a lie. By mid-morning, they were on the ridge road again, tires biting through fresh powder. The air was brittle and clear, every sound too sharp. Lila held the thermos between her gloves, watching her father's face more than the road. Ranger stood in the back body, tense ears pricked forward. When they reached Lake Crow, the wind had carved thin waves in the snow like frozen surf. The coordinates in Ethan's notebook guided him down the slope toward the wreck. It waited there exactly as he'd left it, half swallowed by ice gleaming dully beneath the sun. He parked the SUV behind a line of pines and killed the engine. The silence afterward was absolute, broken only by the soft crunch of their boots. "You stay close," he told Lila, and she nodded. They crossed the drift to where the wing jutted from the snow. In daylight, it looked even more out of place, too clean, too intact. He swept the flashlight along the fuselage. What had seemed frozen solid last night now showed signs of tampering. Along the cargo bay door, a line of new steel bolts gleamed through the frost. The heads were bright silver, untouched by rust. He touched one with a gloved finger. It was cold and recent. "Someone's been here," he said under his breath. "Not long ago." Ranger sniffed at the door seam and gave a low whine. The bolts weren't part of any standard repair. They were anchors, sealing the hatch from the outside. Ethan's training whispered possibilities, contraband, containment, cover-up. But the official report had called the crash unrecoverable. Why would anyone return after 10 years to lock it shut again? He brushed more snow away, exposing the metal tag stamped with inspection initials. The mark wasn't federal or state, it was industrial, used by private contractors, the same kind that serviced government surplus warehouses. Lila stood beside him, her breath making small clouds. "Why would someone lock a door on a broken plane?" she asked. To keep something in, Ethan said softly. The words hung between them like frost. He moved toward the cockpit. The glass canopy had fractured but not collapsed, shards curled inward like petals. Inside, a thick crust of ice coated the panels, preserving everything in a pale stillness. He aimed his light through the crack. What he saw first was fabric gray and brittle, then bone. A shape still seated upright, hands on the controls, head bowed slightly as if in prayer. The remains were nearly mummified, untouched by scavengers. Dad Lila whispered, "Is that the pilot?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Looks like it." But as he leaned closer, something stopped him cold. On the collar of the faded jacket, half buried in frost, a badge caught the light. Not the red and white insignia of a rescue division, but the blue shield of a state police officer. Ethan felt a rush of disbelief. He scraped gently with his glove, revealing the lettering, State Police Investigations Unit. His breath fogged the glass. "This isn't a pilot," he murmured. "It's a cop." Lila's eyes widened. Then why was he flying a rescue plane? He didn't answer. The air around him felt heavier, thick with old lies. He remembered the photo from the night before himself and Captain Marin beside the same aircraft. But Marin had been the pilot. If this wasn't him, then who was this officer, and why wear a badge that should never have been on board? Ethan's flashlight beam slid across the cabin floor. There were scuff marks around the pedals, faint footprints frozen into the grime. Someone had moved in here after the crash, maybe even removed the original pilot. He pulled out his camera, took 3 quick photos angles steady. His instincts told him to leave to file a report and wait. But another instinct, older and harder, said the system that buried this once would bury it again. Ranger barked once, short and urgent. The echo rolled across the lake. Ethan turned, scanning the tree line. Snow drifted from a branch high on the ridge, then another. Maybe wind, maybe not. He switched off the flashlight. "Back to the car," he said. Lila obeyed, clutching Ranger's collar as they climbed the slope. Ethan took one last look at the plane. The sun had dipped low, turning the ice pink. The sealed cargo door gleamed faintly like a warning. As they reached the ridge, he caught a flicker of movement below a single dark figure crossing the snowfield near the tail of the wreck. Too far to see details, but enough to make his heart jolt. The figure paused, turned toward them, and then vanished behind a rise. Ethan grabbed his binoculars from the seat, scanning the basin, but nothing moved now. The wind covered tracks faster than he could blink. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Dad, what did you see?" He forced calm into his tone. Probably just a hiker. He knew it wasn't. He put the car in gear, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Behind them, the lake grew smaller, but he could still see the shimmer of metal under the snowproof that the past had woken. And somewhere out there, someone else was awake with it. Ethan couldn't shake the image of that badge. The blue state police insignia had burned itself into his thoughts all night, and by morning the question had hardened into duty. Snow had stopped, but the cold held sharp sunlight skating across the frozen world like a blade. At the station, he brewed coffee strong enough to steady the tremor in his hand and woke his computer. The photograph of the wreck sat on his desk beside the evidence bag containing the patch he had scraped from the dead man's collar. He typed the code numbers into the state personnel database. The server clocked slow as an old heart, then returned one result. Special Investigator Thomas Keene Federal Division temporarily assigned to State Police Liaison. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. Federal, not local. Keene had been a federal investigator placed under state authority 10 years ago, and the date of his suspension matched the week of the crash. Suspended for breach of protocol. The record read, then nothing more. No reinstatement, no transfer, just a blank. Ethan highlighted the file, sent a data request, but the cursor blinked red. Access restricted clearance level federal. He stared at the screen, the light blue glow painting the tired lines under his eyes. Someone had removed this man from history and buried him in that ice. Lila came in carrying a mug of cocoa, her boots leaving small wet prints on the floor. "You didn't come home last night," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. She looked at the screen. "Is that the man in the plane?" Ethan nodded. He wasn't supposed to be there. Then who was, she asked, but he had no answer that would fit in words she could hold. Ranger whined from the doorway, tail low. The dog always sensed when the air in the room went heavy. Ethan closed the laptop and grabbed his coat. "We're heading back up," he said. Lila frowned. "Didn't they tell you not to?" He smiled without humor. "They tell a lot of things." The drive up felt longer this time. The sun hung cold and bright, reflecting off the snow until the world looked like light without warmth. They parked by the same pines and made their way down the ridge. The air inside the wreck smelled of metal and time. Ethan climbed through the cracked cargo hatch, the beam of his flashlight steady. "Stay here," he told Lila, and she waited near Ranger, drawing shapes in the snow to hide her fear. The cockpit was dim frost, feathering the panels. Ethan's gloves brushed the instrument cluster until he found what he was looking for, a rectangular device bolted under the main console, half hidden by ice. He recognized the casing, a secondary flight data recorder, sometimes called a black box's twin. It stored voice transmissions locally meant for training missions or classified operations. Someone had deliberately removed it from the usual housing and tucked it where no one would look. He pried it loose with a screwdriver from his utility belt. The latch gave a metallic sigh, the sound of truth exhaling after too long. He carried it outside, brushing off the frost. Lila tilted her head. "What's that?" "Something that remembers," he said. Back at the SUV, he hooked the recorder to an adapter linked to his laptop. The screen blinked, then filled with static. He adjusted the gain until voices began to shape from the noise, two men arguing over the engine roar. The first voice, calm but strained, said, "Coordinates confirmed 20 miles north of Crow Ridge." The second voice, sharper, shouted over the hum, "We're overloaded. This isn't standard cargo." Then static again, a burst of wind, the screech of metal. Finally, the second voice came through clear, desperate. "We're carrying too much weight. This isn't a rescue run, it's a delivery." The recording cut off in a burst of static. Ethan sat motionless. Lila clutched Ranger's fur eyes wide, though she didn't fully understand. Ethan replayed the last seconds, slowing it, listening for the tone behind the panic. He recognized the first voice. It was Wade Marin, the pilot from the photograph. The second voice belonged to the man now frozen in the cockpit, Investigator Keene. Two men, one plane, both vanished, but only one body in the wreck. "Delivery," Ethan whispered. "Not rescue." He looked at the crate marks near the cargo bay, the new bolts sealing it shut. Whatever had been inside that plane was never meant for mountain rescue. He imagined the weight shifting as they descended, the panic, the cover-up that followed. His pulse hammered in his ears. He copied the audio to a thumb drive and locked the recorder back in the case. As he stood, a faint reflection caught his eye on the far side of the lake, sunlight on glass, or maybe binoculars. He scanned the ridge, but the shimmer vanished. The feeling of being watched crept back like frost under his collar. "We need to go," he said quietly. They packed up, climbed into the truck, and started the long descent. On the radio, he considered calling it in, then thought of the federal seals and blocked files. The people who had buried this would not let it rise easily. As they reached the bend overlooking town, Lila broke the silence. "What happens now?" Ethan watched the valley stretch ahead, the smoke from chimneys curling up into the pale sky. "Now," he said, "we find out what they were really carrying." The storm had not returned, but the air held a strange stillness, as if the mountain were holding its breath. Sheriff Ethan Cole sat at his desk, the black recorder tucked safely in a locked drawer, the thumb drive hidden inside his wallet. He had spent half the night listening to the voices again, over and over, until the words had carved themselves into his thoughts. Not a rescue run, it's a delivery. He knew what that meant, though part of him wished he didn't. By noon, sunlight cut hard through the blinds and the snow outside reflected it like glass. Ranger dozed by the stove and Lila sketched quietly at the corner table, her pencil moving in small, sure strokes. The phone rang once, startling them both. Ethan lifted it, expecting the usual chatter from dispatch, but a clipped male voice answered his greeting. Sheriff Cole. This is Special Oversight Team Federal Liaison Division. We're inbound to your station ETA 20 minutes. We've been instructed to collect and secure any materials related to the Lake Crow wreckage. Ethan's grip tightened on the receiver. That's a quick response, he said. May I ask who authorized? But the line went dead before he finished. He hung up slowly. 20 minutes. He looked toward Lila. Sweetheart, grab your coat. We might have company. She tilted her head. The bad kind. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that talks too politely. True to their word. 20 minutes later, 2 black SUVs rolled up the icy road and stopped outside the station. 4 men stepped out, all in dark parkas, bearing small government patches that looked newly sewn. Their boots were clean, too clean for mountain work. One man knocked twice before opening the door. Sheriff Cole, he said with a practiced smile. We're here under federal directive to take custody of recovered materials pertaining to the Lake Crow aircraft. He handed over a paper with official seals that looked right, yet too perfect. Ethan scanned it. The wording was vague. All physical and digital evidence to be transferred for containment. Containment, he asked. Strange word for a recovery. The man's smile didn't waver, just a precaution. His voice was soft, educated, careful. Behind him, the others moved through the doorway like they already owned the room. They wore sidearms, but none carried winter gear suitable for long field work. Where's your transport clearance? Ethan asked. These roads aren't cleared for heavy vehicles. We're fine, the man said smoothly. Won't be long. Ethan noticed the license plates on the SUVs through the window, blank, just a white background with stenciled numbers, no state, no jurisdiction. His gut clenched. These men weren't oversight. They were cleanup. He kept his face calm. You'll find the crash file on my desk. The rest's in storage. I'll need signatures for every piece you take. The man gave a courteous nod. Of course. They began collecting folders, camera cards, even his field notebook labeling each with neat bar-coded tags. Ethan let them, biding his time, memorizing faces, accents, gestures. One of them carried himself with the easy authority of someone who had worn a badge once. Lila sat quietly by the stove, hugging Ranger's neck. The dog didn't bark, but his eyes tracked every motion. After 15 minutes, the lead agent closed the last box and slid his gloves on. We appreciate your cooperation, Sheriff. The department thanks you for your vigilance. His tone was the kind that ended conversations. Ethan signed the final form and handed it back, but not before noticing the paper lacked a return address. He looked up. If I need to reach your office... The man smiled faintly. You won't need to. They filed out their boots, leaving perfect shallow prints that looked more like choreography than footsteps. The engine started in unison, the sound hollow against the trees. Ethan stood at the window watching until the SUVs vanished beyond the ridge bend. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then Lila spoke softly. Dad, they took everything. He nodded. Not everything. He still had the audio copy and, more importantly, the knowledge of what he'd heard. He sat at the desk, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the empty blotter. Something on the floor caught his eye, a small white rectangle half buried under the chair leg. Lila bent to pick it up. They dropped this, she said, handing it to him. It was a plastic ID badge, scuffed and cracked. The faded emblem on its corner made Ethan's stomach turn. Regional Police Headquarters, District 12. It was his old department, the place he had left 5 years ago after an internal dispute about evidence tampering. He turned the card over. The photo was missing, peeled away, but the magnetic strip remained intact. Whoever carried it had once walked the same halls he had. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You recognize it?" Lila asked. "Yes," he said quietly. "Too well." Ranger whined, pawing at the door as if urging him to move. Ethan pocketed the badge and looked toward the horizon where the last light bled across the snow. "We're going to find out who sent them," he said. The sun sank behind the ridge, throwing the valley into a soft gray hush. Somewhere down the road, engines faded into the distance, carrying his files and his peace with them. The next morning broke pale and sharp, the kind of light that burns the eyes before it warms the skin. Sheriff Ethan Cole had not slept. The stolen files, the fake inspectors, and that dropped ID badge from his old department circled his thoughts like slow vultures. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the badge, its edges worn smooth, his name and the old station crest ghosting faintly beneath the peeled laminate. Lila sat across from him, spoon-tracing idle paths in a bowl of oatmeal gone cold. "You're thinking about the plane again?" she said, her voice steady but small. Ethan nodded. "Something's wrong with that cargo. Those men came too fast and left too clean." Ranger paced near the door, restless tail flicking. The dog had been uneasy since the visit, his instincts wound tight. Ethan looked at the snow through the window sunlight, cutting thin stripes over the frozen field. "We're going back," he said finally. Lila's spoon stopped. "Won't they come after you?" He looked at her eyes, kind but firm. "They already have." By midday, they were climbing the ridge again. The cold bit deeper this time, dry and sharp as glass. Ethan parked the SUV in the same stand of pines, now shadowed by late light. The site looked untouched, but he knew better. The bolts on the cargo hatch gleamed where snow had melted around them, and faint tracks wide and heavy cut through the drifts before disappearing into the woods. "They were here again," he murmured. Ranger sniffed along the path, then veered toward the rear of the fuselage, nose low, tail stiff. Ethan followed, boots crunching over the brittle crust. Lila kept close behind, her mitten clutching his sleeve. The dog stopped suddenly, paws digging at the base of the wing. He barked once, sharp. Ethan knelt, brushing away snow until his glove struck metal. The sound was different, hollow, contained. He dug faster, the cold biting his fingers. A rectangular corner emerged, then a full steel case the size of a cooler sealed with rivets and coated in frost. It bore no insignia, only a stencil, "Medical Relief," property of U.S. federal aid. The words looked new, paint unchipped, far too fresh for a decade-old wreck. Ethan exchanged a look with Lila. "Help me clear it." Together they scraped the remaining snow away. The lock was simple, a steel latch pinned by ice. He wedged a screwdriver under it, twisted hard, and the seal cracked open with a hiss. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were boxes wrapped in plastic military-grade painkillers, morphine injectors, and field med kits stamped with expiration dates from this year. Lila stared. "That stuff isn't old." Ethan's breath fogged the air. "No, it's not." He picked up one of the boxes, turning it over to read the fine print. The label listed a batch number he knew too well. Lot number 17, C71. His pulse slowed. That same lot had crossed his desk 2 years earlier during a narcotics diversion case in the city, a case that had been closed under the words "insufficient evidence." He remembered the meeting, the quiet pressure from superiors, the way files vanished overnight. "They moved it up here," he said almost to himself. "They hid it in plain sight." Lila frowned. Why would anyone put medicine in a crashed plane? "Because it's not for medicine," he said. "It's profit. Those drugs are worth more than gold up north." Ranger circled the case, nose twitching, then barked at something buried deeper beneath the snow. Ethan set the box down and followed the sound. A second crate, smaller, was lodged against the fuselage's underside. He pried it loose and found an embossed tag riveted to its side. State Police Logistics Division. The emblem was identical to the badge on the dead officer's collar. He brushed frost off the latch heart, hammering. Inside was nothing but packing foam and a single sealed envelope, moisture-warped but legible. He tore it open. A typed manifest listed shipment quantities that matched the crates beside him. At the bottom, in neat script, was a familiar signature, Chief Harold Denton. The pen slipped slightly, as if written in haste. Ethan read it twice, jaw tightening. Denton, his own commanding officer, the man who had reassigned him to this quiet mountain post 5 years ago. The storm of realization hit hard. The crash wasn't an accident, not a rescue mission gone wrong. It had been a transport run for stolen federal narcotics, sanctioned and hidden by people in uniform. And someone had kept replenishing it. Dad Lila whispered, "That's your boss." Ethan folded the paper carefully. "Not anymore," he said. The wind rose, whispering through the pines. He packed the manifest into his coat and resealed the crate. Ranger barked again, this time toward the ridge above them. Ethan followed his gaze. 2 dark figures stood far off against the skyline, too still to be hikers, too silent to be chance. The sunlight flashed on something metal in one man's hand. Maybe binoculars, maybe a weapon. Back in the truck, Ethan said calmly, "They climbed fast, snow slipping under their boots." He didn't look back until they reached the SUV. When he finally turned, the ridge was empty, only the wind moving through the trees. As he started the engine, Lila held Ranger close, her face pale. "What happens now?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the mirror. "Now we find proof they can't erase." By the time they returned to town, the light had gone steel gray and thin snow swept low across the road like smoke. Sheriff Ethan Cole drove in silence, his jaw tight, the sealed manifest heavy in his coat pocket. Lila sat beside him. Ranger sprawled between them on the seat, both of them quiet in the way people grow when they know words can't fix what's coming. The station lights were still on when they arrived. The small building crouched against the wind as if bracing itself. Ethan parked, helped Lila inside, and closed the door behind them. He hung his coat, pulled the envelope free, and set it on his desk beside the radio. The evidence from the wreck felt colder than the air outside. "We'll send it tonight," he said. "To the State Bureau, not through the department. We need a record outside their reach." Lila nodded, understanding more than her years should allow. She sat near the stove with Ranger feeding him small bits of bread while Ethan powered up the secure terminal. The computer's fan hummed a low mechanical sigh. He scanned the manifest, uploaded photos of the crates and serial numbers, and typed a summary that read like confession. When he hit send, the screen blinked processing, then froze. The cursor stopped moving. He tried again. A message appeared, "Access denied account under review." He frowned and checked the network. The connection was live, but the portal had locked him out. Seconds later, the printer coughed and spit out a single sheet. The letterhead bore the insignia of Internal Affairs. The message was brief. Effective immediately. Sheriff Ethan Cole is placed under administrative investigation for evidence tampering and obstruction. System access suspended pending inquiry. The words blurred for a moment before he forced them into focus. "They were ready for this," he said quietly. Lila looked up. "What does it mean?" "It means they just tried to erase me." He leaned back the chair, creaking under his weight. Ranger lifted his head, ears tilting toward the door. A sound a car engine distant rolled down the mountain road, then faded. Ethan stood cross to the window and peered through the thin curtains. Nothing but snow. He felt the shift in his chest, that old familiar pulse of danger, the one that had saved him before. He locked the files away and unplugged the terminal. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. "It's safer than driving home in this." Lila didn't argue. She curled up on the cot, Ranger settling beside her, his steady breathing a small comfort in the stillness. Ethan poured himself coffee that had gone lukewarm, staring at the wall map dotted with old case pins. Each red mark was a place where the truth had been delayed, not denied. He wondered how many of those threads led back to Denton. The clock on the wall ticked past 10. Outside, wind pressed against the siding, moaning through the gaps. He started writing notes by hand, names, dates, the serial numbers again, anything they couldn't wipe from memory. Then it happened. A single sharp crack shattered the glass beside his head, spraying slivers across the desk. The sound was like the world inhaling and breaking at once. Lila screamed, ducking as Ranger barked furiously, body tensed. Ethan dropped behind the desk, pulling Lila down with him. The window curtain flapped inward, torn. "Stay low," he said, heart hammering. A second shot punched through the far window, scattering plaster. He crawled to the side, grabbed his sidearm, and motioned Ranger toward the door. The dog obeyed, growling deep. For a moment there was silence except for the wind. Then tires ground against the ice outside and taillights flashed red through the broken glass before vanishing into the dark. He waited breath-tight until only the creak of cooling metal filled the room. Slowly he stood scanning the windows. 2 holes, clean and precise. Whoever fired knew how to aim and when to leave. Lila's face was pale but composed. "Dad, are they gone?" "For now," he said, checking the floor. Ranger padded to the window, nose pressed against the sill. Ethan stepped outside, the night cutting into his lungs. The snow reflected faint moonlight enough to show a line of footprints leading away from the building. They were deep-spaced, wide apart. He knelt, brushing one clear. The tread pattern was unmistakable cross-hatched soles with a raised emblem used only on tactical boots issued to the department's internal response unit. He had worn the same kind years ago. He felt his stomach turn. These weren't strangers. They were trained men, maybe even ones who'd once called him sir. He returned inside, closing the door against the wind. Lila clung to Ranger, who still bristled at the scent left behind. Ethan moved to the desk, sat slowly, and set his badge beside the cracked mug. "They've made it official," he said almost to himself. "We're not part of them anymore." Lila came closer, resting her hand on his arm. "Then we'll be part of us," she said softly. He looked at her, the faintest smile breaking through the fatigue. "Yeah," he said. "We will." The wind rattled the broken glass again, a reminder that the mountain was listening. Somewhere down the slope, engines started faint, but real, like the growl of something that had found its trail. Ethan reached for his notebook, tore out a fresh page, and began to write a new list. It started with one name, Harold Denton. Morning came brittle and gray, a thin light slipping across the cracked glass of the station windows. Ethan Cole hadn't slept. He'd sat most of the night at his desk, rereading his notes until the words turned into ghosts. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder and coffee gone cold. Ranger rested under the cot head on his paws, watching the door like a sentinel. Lila slept curled under a wool blanket, her breathing steady now that the gunfire had stopped. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like a man already half outside the law he served. Every system he trusted had turned against him, and the only names left in his mind belonged to people who might still remember what justice meant. One name rose above the rest, Judge Eleanor Pike. 10 years ago, she had been the only one willing to question the sealed narcotics cases before she retired. He hadn't spoken to her since his reassignment, but her reputation lingered in the state like a quiet warning. He lifted the receiver of the old landline, dialing from memory. The line rang twice before a voice, thin but sharp, answered. "Pike Residence." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this is Sheriff Ethan Cole, formerly of District 12. I believe we spoke years ago during the Marin case." A pause followed long enough to test sincerity. "You're still alive?" she said at last, not unkindly. Most who ask about that case don't stay that way. Ethan exhaled, half a smile flickering. Ma'am, I need your help. There's been another development. The Lake Crow wreck, they said it was a rescue plane. It wasn't. The pilot was a federal investigator named Thomas Keene. He's dead. I know the name, she said. He was assigned to my docket once, investigating misappropriated narcotics funds. Her voice softened. They shut him down before he could finish. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. That's the year the plane went missing. Yes, she said quietly. The same week, my court order for seizure was revoked. He felt a chill run through him. Judge, I found crates under the wreck still full. Military painkillers active date this year. Someone's been moving them for a decade. There was another pause, heavier this time. You said your chief still oversees that jurisdiction. Harold Denton. Ethan replied. He signed my transfer to the Mountain Post 5 years back. Her tone changed the authority of a lifetime in her voice. Sheriff, listen carefully. 10 years ago, the order to suspend the seizure came across my desk bearing the Attorney General's seal. But the signature. She hesitated. It didn't look right. I kept a copy. I shouldn't have, but I knew one day someone would need it. Do you still have it? Ethan asked. I do, she said. And now you'll have it too. He heard paper rustle faintly on her end of the line. I'll fax it to your station's private line. Within the hour. Keep your phone on, but stay off official channels. You understand I do. Her voice softened again. Ethan Keene wasn't just an investigator. He was the one building a case against your department's upper command before he disappeared. If you've stirred that ground again, they'll come for you the way they came for him. They already have, he said quietly. Then move carefully. The truth is older and angrier than you think. The line clicked dead. Ethan lowered the receiver, the faint hum of static lingering like breath. He turned to the fax machine in the corner, an ancient relic that rarely stirred. After 20 long minutes, it whirred to life, spitting out a single page, its ink faint but legible. Across the top, order of seizure narcotics shipment lot, 17C71. The same number from the crates. At the bottom, a signature Harold Denton, Chief of Police State Division. He stared at it until the lines blurred. The date was 10 years ago, but the pen stroke was the same as on his reassignment papers, steady and deliberate. The proof was right there, Denton's hand reaching through time, shaping both the old case and the new. Lila woke to the noise and rubbed her eyes. Is that from the lady you called? Yes, he said, still staring at the paper. She remembers everything. Lila climbed off the cot and joined him at the desk. Does this mean your boss is bad? He looked down at her, his face lined but calm. It means the wrong man's been calling the shots for a long time. Ranger stood stretching, sensing motion beyond the walls. Ethan folded the paper carefully and slid it into his pocket beside the manifest. Every piece fit now: the dead investigator, the missing drugs, the false reports, and the staged plane crash that had erased them all. The circle was closing. He looked at his daughter. Pack your things, he said quietly. We're leaving the station tonight. Where to? She asked. Somewhere the truth can breathe. He doused the stove, grabbed the radio, and loaded what evidence he had into a duffel bag. As the last light of evening cut through the window, he stood for a moment listening to the mountain wind. Somewhere up the ridge, a faint echo answered like a car door closing far away. The sound of pursuit. He knew then that the truth had found its own momentum and stopping was no longer an option. By afternoon, the sky had changed its mind again, thickening with clouds that moved like bruises across the ridge. Sheriff Ethan Cole stood beside his truck, staring at the dark line of the pines where the road turned toward the watchtower. The call had come an hour earlier. Chief Harold Denton himself, calm as ever. Ethan, he'd said, let's meet. No paperwork, no radios, just the two of us. We need to talk this through like men who remember what service means. Ethan had agreed because he couldn't not. Running would only tighten the noose. He'd told Lila to stay in the cabin and keep the door locked, but she'd shaken her head. "You'll need me," she'd said. And like every time before, he'd found himself unable to argue with the certainty in her voice. Now, as the wind pulled at the hem of his coat, he looked at her small figure beside him, cheeks red from the cold Ranger pressed close to her leg. The dog hadn't healed from the chaos of the last few nights. His left paw still dragged slightly, but he refused to stay behind. The climb to the watchtower was steep, the snow crusted hard under their boots. The structure rose above the tree line, a narrow spine of metal wrapped in ice windows dark. Ethan's breath showed in slow clouds. He could see a lone shape near the railing, Denton waiting. The man's silhouette was steady, his posture casual, as if this were just another inspection. "Stay back," Ethan told Lila softly. "If I call for you, then come." She nodded, pulling Ranger's collar. Ethan climbed the final steps, boots ringing on metal. "You picked a fine place to talk," he said, voice steady despite the wind. Denton turned his face pale under the gray light. "I thought you'd appreciate the view. It's where the old world ends and the real one starts. The real one's made of lies from what I've seen," Ethan said. Denton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Truth is a luxury, son. You of all people should know that. You think wearing a badge means purity. It means compromise." He gestured toward the valley below where the white expanse stretched endless. 10 years ago, when that plane went down, we were on the brink. The department broke the hospitals, underfunded the schools closing. The state didn't care about this mountain, Ethan. So, I found another way. By smuggling drugs, Ethan's voice cut like ice. Denton's gaze hardened. By survival. Those shipments bought medicine for the clinic's heat, for the shelter's roofs, for the old. You've seen the charity drives, the new roads, the Christmas funds they were paid with what the world threw away. "And what about the dead men in that plane?" Ethan asked. "Collateral," Denton said simply. They knew the risk. Keene was supposed to deliver quietly, but he got Noble wanted to blow the whistle. I handled it before he could drag us all down. Ethan stepped closer, jaw tight. "You call that handling, I call it protecting," Denton said. The wind whipped between them, carrying flecks of snow that stung like sand. "You think you can save this town by ruining it? You expose me. You tear apart everything we built." "What you built is rot," Ethan said, "and I won't be part of it." He reached for the cuffs on his belt, his hand firm. "Harold Denton, you're under arrest for..." He never finished. A crack split the air, sharp and vicious. The railing beside him sparked as a bullet punched through the metal. Another hissed past his ear, close enough to taste the burn of it. Lila screamed below. "Dad." Ethan dropped to one knee, scanning the slope beneath the tower. The shot had come from the tree line, a clean sniper's angle. Denton's face went white. "You brought them here," he shouted, ducking low. "I didn't bring anyone," Ethan replied, pulling his pistol eyes, raking the woods for movement. Another shot rang out, shattering the glass behind Denton. The chief crawled toward the far side of the platform, breath ragged. "They're not supposed to," he began, but his words vanished under the next shot. Down below, Lila had run from cover, Ranger beside her. "Stay down," Ethan yelled, but she was already halfway up the stairs. The next bullet came low, slicing through the air and grazing her sleeve. She froze, stunned by the sound, and in that heartbeat, Ranger moved a blur of fur and courage. The dog lunged forward, barking, once his body twisting midair as the bullet found him instead. The sound was dull, final. He fell into the snow, motionless. "No," Lila cried, dropping beside him. Ethan fired toward the trees, 1, 2, 3 rounds, aiming for flashes of movement. Silence followed, deep and echoing. He scrambled down the steps, boots slipping. Lila knelt in the snow, her hands trembling over Ranger's chest. The dog's eyes blinked once, meeting Ethan's before dimming to stillness. Ethan knelt beside them, his breath breaking in clouds. "He's gone," Lila whispered. Ethan's throat tightened, but he forced the words through it. "He saved you," he said. "He always would." Denton's voice drifted down from above, ragged. "You see what truth costs." Ethan looked up, anger and grief merging in his chest. "It costs less than lies," he said. He gathered Lila close, one arm around her as snow began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier as if the mountain were trying to bury what had just happened. He knew this wasn't over. The shooter had been Denton's insurance, and insurance always came back for collection. The wind had slowed by dawn, leaving the tower half buried under white silence. Sheriff Ethan Cole knelt in the snow beside Ranger's still body, one arm around Lila, the other gripping the side of the dog's collar, as if his strength alone could keep the world from tipping. The ridge was pale blue now, the first light of morning slipping through a veil of mist. Above them, Chief Harold Denton leaned against the railing, breathing hard, one shoulder dark with blood where a shard of glass had cut him. His voice carried faintly down the metal stairs. "You don't understand, Ethan," he said, almost pleading. "I didn't start this. I just learned how to live with it." Ethan rose slowly, brushing the frost from his sleeve. "You lived with it," he said, "and good men died for it." He took Lila's hand and guided her toward the shelter of the tower's base. "Stay here," he whispered. Her eyes were wet, but fierce. "He can't walk away," she said. "No," Ethan agreed. "He won't." He reached for his jacket zipper and pulled free the small body camera clipped beneath it, the kind every deputy wore but few remembered existed. He pressed the red button and felt the soft vibration as it went live. The lens blinked once, recording. Then he turned the dial on his radio, tuning it to the emergency frequency used by the county's dispatch network. The air crackled static, filling the space like the sound of the mountain breathing. He spoke into the receiver voice, calm and even. "This is Sheriff Ethan Cole, badge number 4121. I'm on Crow Ridge with Chief Harold Denton. I have a confession regarding the Lake Crow incident and the misuse of federal property." Denton's head snapped up. "Turn that off." Ethan ignored him, his voice steady. "For 10 years, our department has facilitated the illegal transport and sale of military narcotics under the guise of community aid programs. The profits funded local charities, infrastructure, and political campaigns. The evidence is buried in a crash site at Lake Crow. The signature on the original seizure order is falsified." He looked straight into the camera, eyes clear. "And the man behind it stands here with me." Denton's composure cracked. "You think they'll believe you? You're suspended. You're nobody." Ethan adjusted the camera slightly, making sure Denton's face filled the frame. "Then you'd better tell them yourself." He stepped aside, the wind swirling snow between them. Denton stared at the camera, his mouth opening then closing again. "You don't know what you're doing," he said finally. "You're destroying what we built." "No," Ethan said. "I'm giving it a chance to start clean." He switched the radio from local to statewide emergency relay, the signal that every patrol, every dispatch office, and every federal link could hear. A second of static passed, then the mountain filled with Denton's voice. The older man spoke first in anger, then weariness, the words spilling faster than thought. "Yes, I signed it. I did what I had to. They left us to rot up here. The drugs kept this county alive. You want to judge me? Go ahead." Ethan let him speak. The confession went on for over a minute before Denton realized what he'd done. By then, it was too late. From miles away, the faint echo of radio chatter began to rise, stations cross-confirming the signal officers repeating coordinates, federal units calling for intercept. Denton stepped back, pale. "You," he began, but the rest was drowned out by the distant thrum of rotors. Helicopters. The first light of sunrise reflected off their windows as they crested the ridge engines, breaking the silence of the mountain. Snow spiraled upward in great waves as the crafts hovered above the clearing. Lila clung to her father's coat, wind whipping her hair. Federal agents in winter gear disembarked, weapons low but ready. One of them shouted through a megaphone, "Sheriff Cole, step back from the suspect." Ethan raised his hand slowly. "He's all yours," he called. Denton didn't move. He stood frozen, watching the men advance. The weight of 10 years seemed to settle across his shoulders all at once. When they reached him, he didn't resist. The cuffs clicked metal against metal, small but final. Ethan felt no victory, only relief, a long breath that reached deeper than lungs. One of the agents approached him, taking the radio still buzzing in his hand. "We've been tracking your signal for 15 minutes, the man said. "That broadcast went statewide. You just lit a fire that won't go out." Ethan nodded faintly. "That's the idea." He turned as Lila knelt beside Ranger, brushing snow from the dog's fur. "He's breathing," she said suddenly. Ethan crouched, pressing his ear close. There it was, a shallow, steady rhythm, the pulse of a fighter unwilling to quit. "He's not done yet," Ethan said softly. A medic from the team hurried over, wrapping the dog in a thermal blanket before loading him into a transport sled. Lila held his paw until the last moment. The sun rose higher, turning the snow to gold. The mountain, so long wrapped in silence, now hummed with motion radio calls, voices, the sound of engines, the crackle of a truth finally spoken aloud. Ethan stood apart from it all, watching Denton led toward the helicopter, the man's head bowed but unbroken. When the rotors started again, the wind caught Ethan's coat tugging at the badge on his chest. He looked down at it, the small piece of metal that had once meant everything, and unclipped it, holding it in his hand. The reflection of the sun burned across its surface, bright and cold. Lila walked to his side. "What will you do now?" she asked. He smiled gently, closing her fingers around the badge. "Start over," he said. "We both will." As they stood together on the ridge, the day widened around them, the world beginning again. Ethan looked toward the valley where the wreck still slept beneath the snow and whispered, "Some things you can't keep buried, not under ice, not under time, not." "Before you go, tell me what you think. Did Sheriff Ethan Cole make the right choice when he exposed the truth? Or should he have stayed silent to protect his town? What moment in the Blue Ridge Mountains hit you the hardest? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more stories that uncover the line between loyalty and justice, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. Where are you watching from tonight?